I'm Nima Rajan. 19 years ago this morning, 4 planes were hijacked and used in a terror attack against the U.S. Approximately 3,000 people were killed in the 4 attacks, including 24 Canadians. Traditional 9/11 ceremonies this year are being adjusted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau paid tribute to first responders this morning and praised them for their heroism for running toward danger when help was needed. Well, with the throne speech less than 2 weeks away, Prime Minister Trudeau headlined a virtual fundraiser for the Liberals last night. Party officials say some 4,000 people tuned in for the online event, the largest gathering of Liberals since their 2018 national convention. Donors were invited to submit written questions to the Prime Minister, but only 5 were put to Trudeau during the 45-minute event. Well, meanwhile, the Liberal government is proposing a full resumption of parliamentary business using a hybrid model when the House of Commons resumes in less than 2 weeks. But there's still no agreement on how a returning parliament will function as the COVID-19 pandemic drags on. The government is proposing that a limited number of MPs attend in person, with the rest participating online. New Democrats are proposing a similar approach, but it's not clear whether the Conservatives or the Bloc Québécois will agree. Canada's election watchdog says former Finance Minister Bill Morneau broke the law when he promoted Liberal candidates at government-funded events. Yves Côté says ahead of last year's election, Mr. Morneau pumped up 2 prospective Liberal candidates who are attending separate events that he headlined as Finance Minister. Mr. Morneau's riding association has paid back the cost of the events, and he himself must also pay $300. Another virtual First Minister's meeting is on the horizon. This one is being brought on by a call for more federal funding for health care transfers. The premiers of Ontario and Quebec initiated the discussion during a meeting between the two earlier this week. The pair noted that a recent commitment from the federal government for nearly $20 billion to help cover COVID-19 costs was a one-time transfer, when what is needed is sustainable long-term funding. And it is the final stretch for New Brunswick's political leaders as voters head to the polls on Monday. Today, Progressive Conservative Party leader Blaine Higgs will make an announcement in Florenceville before swinging across the northern end of the province. Liberal leader Kevin Vickers campaigns along the East Coast, while People's Alliance leader Chris Austin is in Doketown and Tracyville. The Greens have an education announcement planned at UNB in Fredericton. A Vancouver surgeon has lost a lengthy court battle over a provincial law banning extra billing for health care and private insurance. A BC Supreme Court justice says Dr. Brian Day failed to show that the law violates the constitutional rights of patients to access private care when wait times in the public system are too long. Health Minister Adrian Dix says access to health care must be based on need and not how much money a person makes. Newfoundland and Labrador's Liberal government is to table its next budget on September 30th. It will be the province's first under the newly installed Premier Andrew Furey. It will also be delivered midway through the 2020-2021 fiscal year and comes after an update in July projected a $2.1 billion deficit. A 3-month supply bill is set to be introduced to keep operations running until the budget is passed. Ontario's Premier is musing about cancelling Halloween or marking October 31st in some other way.
We got to be so careful, and that's a month and a half away, Halloween, and we got to take care of the kids. That's a priority. That makes me nervous. A month and a half is a long time when it comes to COVID. You look back a month and a half ago, and even a few weeks ago, we're below 100, and all of a sudden it spiked up to almost double. So let's play it by ear and see what happens over the next month and the next month and a half for Halloween.
Doug Ford says he'd rather parents not take their kids out trick-or-treating as the province struggles to keep its COVID-19 case numbers under control. Ontario has seen a steady increase in COVID-19 cases in recent weeks, reporting 170 new infections and another death from the virus. Quebec is cracking down on people not wearing masks in indoor public spaces.
We cannot accept that a few irresponsible people put all Quebec at risk. It's time to penalize them. I'm announcing that starting Saturday, people who refuse to wear a mask without reason, where it's mandatory, will receive fines.
The Quebec Premier says most Quebecers have been following COVID-19 public health guidelines. But Mr. Legault says some are not, and they're putting the province's elderly and its health network at risk. Masks are mandatory across Quebec in indoor public spaces and on public transit. Coming up after the break, I speak with Tony Clement, host of Boom and Bust. Stay tuned. More news from around the world coming up right after the break. Stay tuned. Erin O'Toole has addressed his first official caucus meeting since becoming Conservative leader and says his party will show all Canadians that the Tories are a government in waiting. He says the party will do so by working together with respect, professionalism, and the pursuit of excellence. Mr. O'Toole also says Canadians haven't always seen themselves in the Conservative Party, but he believes that will change under his leadership. He says they will see themselves reflected in a serious, intelligent, compassionate, and ethical Conservative caucus. This follows the naming of his shadow cabinet Tuesday, including his predecessor Andrew Scheer as the party's infrastructure critic. The Liberal government has been under fire for yet another ethics scandal, leading the Bloc Québécois to call for an election this upcoming fall. But with a new leader and freshly shuffled cabinet, could the Conservatives win if there is another election on the horizon? Well, joining me now is Tony Clement, host of Boom and Bust. Thank you for joining us today, Tony.
My pleasure.
Now, are there any names that stand out in the Conservatives' shadow cabinet?
There's certainly an attempt to be very broad-based in the shadow cabinet. That's the critic responsibilities that the opposition caucus members have. A lot younger, a lot more millennials in there. I think of Leanne Rood, who is the agriculture shadow cabinet critic, if you will, and Warren Stanley, and there's a number of others like that. So that's one thing I did notice. The other thing I noticed was that Erin O'Toole has a shadow cabinet role. He's given himself the role as the critic for middle-class prosperity, and I think that gives you a really good indication where he's going to be focused in the next election campaign as well.
And would you say there were any surprise appointments?
I wouldn't say surprise appointments. I was interested to see what Andrew Scheer would be doing, and he has a role, as you mentioned, as the infrastructure shadow minister. So that's, I think, an appropriate role for a former leader. Mike Chong is foreign affairs shadow minister. Again, a very seasoned parliamentarian, so I think he'll do very well there. So I wouldn't say there were any surprises, but certainly he's done a lot of baking. What's come out is I think, very presentable to the public.
And how do you think the Conservative COVID-19 action plan compares to the Liberals' response to the pandemic?
Well, I think here Erin O'Toole is skating, trying to thread the needle a little bit. He knows he's got to be very careful, skate on thin ice, because he doesn't want to be seen as being mean and nasty to the public when we're, many members of the public are going through a hard time right now. So his criticisms are that the programs aren't delivering what they promise. We would deliver better programs. He's not saying we're going to be cutting everybody off and let them fend with the wolves themselves. So I think that is actually the right approach and indicates his seriousness when it comes to these kinds of issues.
And what about this election that the Bloc Québécois are pushing for? How likely would there be an election this upcoming fall? And if there is, what would need to happen for the Conservatives to win?
Well, Nima, it's hard to say at this point. I know there's a lot of speculation about an election. Erin O'Toole has said he doesn't want an election. Justin Trudeau has said he doesn't want an election. Of course, having an election in the middle of a pandemic probably is not a good idea. But the Liberals have to find a dance partner. They're going to be delivering a throne speech. If the throne speech is voted down, that is a vote of confidence and could spark an election call. So NDP, Green Party, Bloc Québécois, somebody's got to be able to vote for the throne speech if it is going to pass Parliament.
All right. Well, the Conservatives, the majority of their support comes from prairie provinces. How do you think the Conservatives can expand their voter reach to reach other provinces?
Well, that's the key responsibility of the leader and his team. And they are definitely focusing on two areas right now, the province of Quebec where there's only a handful of Conservative seats, and of course the 905 region in Ontario. Aaron O'Toole himself is a MP from the 905 region, so he knows very well the Conservatives have to do a lot better if they're going to form a government. So expect to see Aaron O'Toole a lot in Brampton, Mississauga, St. Catharines, Waterloo, those areas, because they know how important it is to win the next election.
All right, Tony, we've got about 20 seconds left, but how should the O'Toole government rebrand the Conservatives so that they could represent all the inclusive values of Canadians?
Well, I think you just said it there. It's got to be open, diverse, inclusive, compassionate. The mean streak that is attributed to conservatism has got to go away, and Aaron O'Toole knows that.
All right, perfect. Tony, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Up next, Ontario surgeons take on the massive backlog of surgeries in the province. Airbnb releases new rules for short-term rentals, and an Indigenous filmmaker debuts her new documentary. The Bank of Canada says the slower rebound facing women, youth, and low-wage workers could pose a threat to a broader economic recovery from COVID-19. Central Bank Governor TIFF MACKLEM says getting people back to work is the best way to improve economic outcomes over time.
Monetary policy can't target specific sectors or specific people or workers. But the stronger the recovery is, the more durable the recovery is, the more there will be broad-based opportunity for Canadians. And the more there's broad-based opportunity for Canadians, the stronger will be the recovery and the more durable will be growth.
The Bank of Canada is keeping its key interest rate at 0.25%, saying it sees a bumpy recovery ahead despite a better-than-expected bounce back from spring pandemic lockdowns. A BC judge is set to sentence a gang leader today in retaliation or in relation to a 2007 series of shootings that left 6 people dead at a high-rise apartment building. Jamie Bacon pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to murder Corey Lall in the so-called Surrey 6 case. A statement of facts read in court said that the killings were carried out to advance the drug trafficking business of a criminal gang. Ontario's premier says he wants surgeons to begin working on weekends in order to clear a massive backlog of surgeries postponed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Doug Ford estimates about 180,000 procedures were postponed after lockdown measures went into effect in March. Modeling research published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal earlier this month estimated Ontario's surgery backlog would take at least a year and a half to clear. An Alberta doctor is worried that the province's homeless shelters won't have enough space to keep everyone safe once the cold weather hits. Dr. Richard Musto is a retired public health officer who has been volunteering to help Calgary's most vulnerable citizens during the COVID-19 pandemic. He says it's crucial to ensure 2 meters of spacing between beds, even when there isn't an outbreak. The province has committed $48 million to support shelters and community organizations. The Ontario government says it's starting the process of creating a wildlife conservation reserve in Prince Edward County. If successful, the reserve would include Ostrander Crown Land Block and Point Peter Provincial Wildlife Area. The province says it will work with Indigenous communities and environmental organizations to assess the prospective site in the coming months. The British Columbia government is urging water conservation amid drought conditions across the southern half of the province. The province says there are particularly low water flows in the Okanagan and Vancouver Island regions. Officials are encouraging individuals to limit outdoor watering, take shorter showers, avoid leaving taps running, and install water-efficient shower heads, taps, and toilets. Canada's Federal Housing Agency says more than 750,000 homeowners have either deferred or skipped a mortgage payment since the COVID-19 pandemic began. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says that works out to about $1 billion in deferrals a month this spring, based on Equifax Canada's estimate of the average monthly mortgage payment. Toronto Mayor John Tory is calling on upper levels of government to provide additional economic support for Canada's downtowns amid the COVID-19 pandemic. He's asking the federal and provincial governments to take a number of steps to protect businesses, particularly ones facing a slow recovery, such as hotels and restaurants. The mayor also called for the replacement or extension of several federal programs, including the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. Renting out properties for short-term stays has gotten a lot more complicated in Canada's largest city. Toronto homeowners must register now with the city if they want to fill their units for any period less than 28 days. Airbnb chief executive Brian Chesky said in May that amid travel bans due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the company is expecting 2020 revenue to be less than half of the sales in 2019. The wife and mother of 4 slain family members is thanking supporters, first responders and medical workers in Oshawa, Ontario. Loretta Trainor's husband, Chris, and 3 of their children were gunned down in the family home almost a week ago. Their eldest son wasn't home at the time, and he's now at his mother's side. Ms. Trainor says she is profoundly grateful for the support they've been receiving. A new documentary, Inconvenient Indian, by Toronto-based director Michelle Latimer, is set to debut tomorrow at the Toronto International Film Festival. The filmmaker adapted it from Thomas King's acclaimed non-fiction book about the cultural colonization of Indigenous peoples in North America. Ms. Latimer says she wanted to reverse the white settler lens that has seen Indigenous peoples' history. She says to have been given images of your own community for so long felt disempowering, but now she has been able to change that. All right, don't go away. When we come back, President Trump pushes for a Buy American policy. More after the break. U.S. President Donald Trump turned up in Michigan for a re-election campaign stop. In an effort to win over working-class voters, President Trump targeted his rival, Joe Biden, for supporting the original North American Free Trade Agreement. Trump told the crowd that they had been ripped off, blaming NAFTA for sending auto manufacturing jobs to Mexico before adding, quote, Canada too. He then mentioned the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, saying that he kept his promise to bring good-paying auto jobs back to hard-working states like Michigan. It's up to a panel of federal appeals court judges to decide whether the city of Baltimore can keep using an aerial surveillance program as a high-tech crime-fighting tool. And so far, there's no clear consensus on which way they will decide. The 3-judge panel, which is based in Richmond, Virginia, heard arguments on the issue remotely yesterday. The American Civil Liberties Union has sued over the aerial surveillance, saying it violates people's constitutional right to be free of indiscriminate searches. Raging wildfires across the western U.S. have killed at least 10 people and 16 remain missing. Officials say more than 1.2 million hectares have burnt. In Oregon, fire officials warn 2 large fires are expected to merge as water bombers have been unable to battle the flames due to the thick smoke. Authorities say they're facing fire situations never seen before in the state. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is warning that much-anticipated negotiations between Afghanistan's warring parties are likely to be contentious. But he said today that they are the only way forward if Afghans are to find peace after decades of relentless conflict. Secretary Pompeo made his comments en route to Qatar, where intra-Afghan negotiations are to begin Saturday. The negotiations were laid out in a peace deal Washington brokered with the Taliban and signed in Doha on February 29th. Syrian state media is reporting that Israeli warplanes have fired missiles on suburbs of the northern city of Aleppo. There were no immediate reports of casualties. On August 31st, an attack targeted the southern suburbs of the capital, Damascus, killing 2 soldiers and wounding 7. Israel rarely comments on such reports, but is believed to have carried out raids targeting Iran's military presence in Syria. The Indian and Chinese foreign ministers have agreed that their troops should disengage from a tense border standoff. The ministers met in the Russian capital and concurred that the current situation was not in the interest of either side. Since last week, both sides have accused one another of sending soldiers into the rivals' territory and threatening a full-scale conflict. In their statement Friday, the ministers did not set any timeline for the disengagement of tens of thousands of troops locked in a standoff since May. Smoke is billowing from Beirut's port hours after firefighters said they were able to bring under control a huge fire that terrified the city's residents just 5 weeks after a massive blast killed and wounded thousands of people. The fire led authorities to order the removal of all dangerous materials from the country's ports and airport to avoid such incidents that have traumatized the nation of 5 million. It was not clear what caused the fire that broke out Thursday afternoon and covered the city with dark smoke and toxic fumes. Thousands of refugees and migrants have spent a third night in the open on the Greek island of Lesbos after 2 consecutive nights of fires in the notoriously overcrowded Moria camp left them homeless. Greek authorities have said that the fires on Tuesday and Wednesday evening were deliberately set by some of the camp's residents, who were angered by isolation orders issued to prevent the spread of the coronavirus after 35 residents were found to have been infected. Mexico's Labor Department and the UN Refugee Agency have launched a campaign to encourage employers to hire refugees amid a spike in asylum and refugee requests. The Labor Department said Thursday that the program aims to triple the number of refugees finding legal work in Mexico, in states where the refugee population does not compete for jobs with the local people. Mexico saw requests for asylum or refugee status skyrocket from over 2,000 in 2014 to over 70,000 in 2019. The man who inspired the film Hotel Rwanda for saving people from genocide and is now accused of terrorism in Rwanda has spoken to his family for the first time since being paraded in handcuffs on August 31st. The uncertainties around his arrest have led Human Rights Watch to assert that 66-year-old Paul Rusesabagina, an outspoken critic of the Rwandan government, was forcibly disappeared. The Belgian citizen and U.S. permanent resident has not yet appeared in court. A photo of a father and daughter in Iran is making the rounds on social media because of the beautiful message behind it. According to the original post, her father said to her, "Don't tell anyone that your father is a janitor. They will laugh at you." Instead, she posted a photo of her embracing him in his janitorial uniform and wrote, "My dad is a janitor. He is my pride. I love you, Dad." And that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for news on demand, log on to thenewsforum.ca and follow us on social media. We'll see you next time.